Welcome to a Monday edition of Altitude Advantage. I am your host and team reporter, Elisa Hernandez. Across the table from me, we have our lead writer on DenverBroncos.com, Aric DiLalla, and we also have our digital media contributor, Susanna Ware, in the podcast studio today. We're going to talk about so many things today. Obviously, the loss from Week 9, a couple of transactions that happened with the Broncos, and some comments from YouTube and all those good things. So we're going to get to a lot of things on this Monday's podcast, but we are going to start off with some transactions. Now, we do see that Baron Browning has been traded to the Arizona Cardinals in exchange for a 2025 sixth-round pick. The pass rusher will now be headed to Arizona, but the Broncos did lock up their other outside linebacker in Jonathan Cooper to a 4-year extension. So, Aric, I'm going to kick it over to you. What does it mean to kind of have a guy like Jonathan Cooper of his caliber and what he's been able to do this season locked up for the next 4 years?
Yeah, obviously, as we're recording this, the trade deadline is just about a day away. And Sean Payton was asked about it Monday morning, and he kind of talked more about the trade deadline from an acquisition standpoint, I think. And he said, listen, there's no Superman coming here to save us. Like, we've got to do what we need to do with the people in this locker room. He's focused on the guys in the building. But I think these two moves obviously are intertwined, right? And it starts with the 4-year extension for Jonathan Cooper, a 2021 seventh-round pick. He was in that George Payton initial draft class. He's now the third guy from that class to get extended, joining Pat Surtain and Quinn Miners. And you had Jonathan Cooper and you had Baron Browning, who are both set to be unrestricted free agents at the end of this year. And so when you look at it, and based on the fact that you have Nick Bonito playing as well as he has, who's a year younger, you have Jonah Ellis, who you just selected on day 2 at the NFL draft, who has been playing well, has a couple of sacks. The way it was going, I don't think it was a surprise that one of them wasn't back. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously there was a question coming into the season, which of the guys would be back, which guy would they try to re-sign, and we don't know. Maybe the Broncos knew all along that Jonathan Cooper was the guy they wanted to keep on this roster. But it was a tough start to the season, I think, for Baron Browning. Went on IR after week 2, and then in his absence, Nick Bonito stepped in and had a sack in 6 straight games. And Baron had come back the last few games, had not recorded a sack yet this season. But I think more so than being specific to Browning, I would guess, is just that it's intertwined of you're going to probably lose one of these guys regardless at the end of the season, just in terms of someone going to free agency. Keep Jonathan Cooper, who is a starter. He's a really good run player. I think he's an emotional leader of this defense. You see him on game day. He's fired up. He's making all these weird faces. He's intense. I mean, it's like fun to watch him on a game day. But you have a guy like Jonathan Cooper. Keep him in the building. And unfortunately, it maybe makes Baron a little bit expendable. And the fact that you're able to get a 6th-round pick, it may not sound like a lot to fans who I think if it's not a 3rd-round pick or higher, sometimes fans kind of dial it out or drone it out, but you can find guys in the 6th round that can contribute, right? And so, and the Broncos, I think, have several 6th-round picks now for next year, so maybe you package those, move up a little bit, but you're acquiring draft capital, and I think the key is, just to put a bow on this first thought, is that it was clear against the Ravens, and we'll get to that game and kind of everything that happened, the missed opportunities, but Sean Payton mentioned, hey, there are these elite teams in this league, and then there's teams like us that are still building. We're working toward that. Mm-hmm. And I think yesterday's game in some ways showed the Broncos are still working toward that. And so, you've got to have the resources and the assets to keep building and going the way you want to go. And so getting something for Baron Browning, who, again, maybe you can't keep both these guys, being able to get something in return for one of those guys can help you down the line and hopefully build your team to a Ravens-type roster.
Yeah, I remember Vance Joseph, defensive coordinator Vance Joseph, had talked about the young guys on this team, also the veterans and the hard workers and the kind of guys you kind of bring in and truly develop. And if you look at Jonathan Cooper, he was a 239th overall pick. And for him to kind of work his way up from, that draft pick and now become a starter, like you said, a leader, and now get this 4-year extension, I think it also shows kind of like the benefits and the rewards of all his hard work and what he's been able to produce to this team. When you look at his numbers, he started in 35 of the last 36 games, recorded 193 tackles, 18.5 sacks, 20 tackles for loss, 38 quarterback hits. I mean, the list just keeps going. 3 fumble recoveries, 2 forced fumbles, interception, defensive touchdown to begin his career. And you kind of look at all those numbers and you tie it into the other members of that defensive front and kind of how they're able to gel together from that perspective, how beneficial is it when you're building this team to have like a core set of guys that are really going to make an impact?
Yeah, I think this team is still building, right? Like, it's early in that process still, even though the team's 5-4 and in the midst of the AFC playoff picture, it's still early. And so to have guys like Zach Allen and Jonathan Cooper and Nick Bonito and Pat Surtain, PJ Locke re-signed this past offseason, like, to have those guys, it's important. And I'm sure I'm not intentionally missing anyone, but certainly other guys on that defense as well that you've locked in and have here. That's important to make sure that this defense can play at a level that obviously we didn't see yesterday in Baltimore, but for much of the season, they've been a big reason why the Broncos have found success. And so I do think and Zach Allen said it, Jonathan Cooper's a guy that does everything the right way. He just works, and he came and improved himself. You mentioned the 7th round draft status, but when he was drafted, he had that heart issue, and people were like unsure. And I know that he kind of came forward and said, like, I was confident that this was going to work out, but having a heart procedure is scary. And I believe it was a heart ablation. And so he was out for a while, had to work his way back from that. I think it took a little bit longer than maybe some people expected from the media. And then he just got his chance and he made it happen. And that's it's really kind of a heartwarming. That was not intentional, but to see him come back from that and kind of work through all that. He wore 0 at Ohio State because of his character and was awarded that by the school. There's all these videos from when he was drafted of like the neighborhood kids coming up and saying hello and visiting with him. And so he's just one of the good guys in that locker room, and it's nice to see it pay off for him.
Yeah, I think Zach Allen also spoke about that it sends the right message in the sense that when you put in the work and you are contributing to the culture here, like, you do get rewarded. And I think it's a sentiment felt across the locker room that they are very happy for him again, because he is one of those guys that really does is always willing to kind of be the face after losses and speak on it. He doesn't shy away from criticism. He's one of the guys that really takes accountability. I mean, everyone is, but he's definitely one of the leaders on that. So it's good to kind of see him get locked up again for that 4-year extension with the Broncos. And I think joining the other team, the other kind of players too, like you said, Quinn Miners and Pat Surtain II, I think that also shows that the Broncos are also committed to wanting to make this team as successful as possible. And defense wins championships, right? And so you got, 2 of the best defensive guys on your team locked up, obviously Quinn Miners on the offensive line, being able to really kind of start setting that notion, because you do have Bo Nix behind them. So I think that's also a good message to send as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this team is being built the right way, and it's encouraging when you see there's like 3 or 4 guys from the last X number of draft classes that were extended, and now you have 3 from that first draft class of George Paton's, and you've got to build through the draft. You supplement through free agency, but it's got to happen through the draft. And so, yeah, they did hit on a lot of these guys. We've heard Sean Payton talk at different occasions that he feels like this 24 draft class could be the same type of class to one that he had in New Orleans, like in 2017, that was such a good draft class for the Saints. So you've got to build it, and there's still work to be done there, obviously, but you also want to reward your kind of homegrown players, and that's important. So this is it's not quite the like star-studded, like popular move. It's not going to get maybe the national attention that the Surtain extension does when he becomes the highest paid defensive back in the league, but it is a big move, I think, just in terms of what the Broncos are trying to build and the culture they want to keep moving forward.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So moving on to our next segment, we're actually going to talk some comments on the Monday podcast. We have Suze in the building, who's also going to help us out with that. I see them already looking away to see what comments we're going to start off with. So, Suze, what comments do we have from our YouTube listeners out there? So make sure you guys comment, subscribe, all that good stuff to the Altitude Advantage podcast. Suze?
All right, starting off strong with Layla said, I lived in Colorado Springs over 30 years. I had season tickets the last time I lived there. The Broncos never lost a game I was at. It was John Elway days.
This is like someone needs to come back.
Someone responded and said, come back then, please.
Come back, please.
All right, next up we got Truth Be Told says, let's enjoy the new era of winning culture in Broncos country.
Before we get back to that,
Oh, we have one about the whole crew here.
Oh.
Jawan Powell says, first time I'm seeing Suze on the show. Y'all seem to make a good team. This should be a permanent trio. Love the show, by the way.
Oh, look at Suze getting all the love.
Thoughts?
I think kind of like a trial basis is nice.
Back to the hazing again. Oh, Aric, you got a shout out from Jeremy. One says, Aric is an NFL whiz. I've been watching the show since the old days.
How long have you been on this podcast?
A long time. A really long time.
All right, let's see what else we got here.
Got some good comments. Okay.
Yeah, we got lots of comments. Monica says, like to see the show is growing. I believe there are 4 mics. We can add one more. And unite Broncos country. And then welcomed me to the party.
I'm like, does the other mic even have a camera on them? So if they talk, are they even seen?
They're anonymous.
Oh.
Maybe I'll move over there.
No.
Could be good.
They'll know your voice instantly. You're the whiz.
Smokey Griff came to my rescue, said, I agree with the hazing. I like it, but they can definitely be a little more tactful with how they do it. Just need a little lesson. It's an art form and they don't have it. Be better.
I don't haze, so I don't need to practice my art form in hazing.
I think we're going to get in trouble for all this joking about hazing. There's no hazing going on.
There's no hazing.
No hazing. Hazing is bad and we're not doing it.
Ryan Halifax said, how come Susan is picking and choosing with the comments? Don't like that. She can go.
Okay, my favorite part was Aric almost spitting out his water. That was my favorite part of that comment.
Suze.
That's okay.
That means you're doing something right.
Oh, the Dodgers got a shout out.
Hey, read that one.
Erica Marufo said, a win against a team like the Ravens will go a long way. But we'll talk about that
in a second.
Go Broncos and go Dodgers.
Hey, go Dodgers.
All right. Are we doing more?
What else?
If you got more, Suze, keep them going.
Aric, do you have
keep
any?
the pace going. Oh no, I'm letting.
I mean,
Suze.
a lot of them
reins.
are about hazing. So I feel like we kind of got that out of the system. So.
Yeah, it's for all of our listeners out there. Suze does not get hazed. She's loved and cherished here.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, a lot of them are about the hazing. So I think
we got that
covered.
I think the most quote unquote hazing that Suze ever got was us singing her happy birthday.
Yeah,
and she got embarrassed.
There's no hazing going on. HR is going to come find us after this podcast, and things are going to be great. And then Suze is going to be doing the podcast by herself. So,
yep.
Everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
I think that's her plan.
That's what she wants.
That actually might be
a good play.
Her plan. That actually might be her plan. But again, to all of our listeners out there, make sure you guys comment. You guys can also leave questions. You have questions for us. They can be about the game. They can be just random questions. We've had our fair random questions. But we love them. So make sure you guys comment, share this podcast with everyone. And we do appreciate you guys listening. Now, switching gears away from the comments, which I'm sure everyone was really looking forward to potentially getting a win on Sunday. Unfortunately, the Broncos fell to the Ravens 41-10 in Week 9. It was, the Ravens are the AFC's top offense. They were going against, a defense that had been playing very well for the Broncos over the last couple of weeks. This game seemed to get close, and then kind of a touchdown here, a touchdown there, and next thing you know, was kind of really out of reach. But Aric, as you kind of look back at this game, we always check in with you 48 hours later, because I know in the moment it's easy to really pick out certain things or certain moments, but I know when you look back, there's certain other key moments that really stick out. So what have you digested from this game against the Ravens?
Yeah, I think the big thing is just that the Broncos, they had their chances, and I think they knew based on kind of the way they went for it on fourth down that they were going to need to be aggressive, that this Ravens team posed a big challenge, right? And unfortunately, they just didn't take advantage of those opportunities is really what it came down to. Too many mistakes. The second play of the game, right? Bo Nix throws to little Jordan Humphrey, goes off Humphrey's hands. He says after the game, I got to make that catch, which is true, and it's credit to him for owning up to that. But when you're on the road against a team that is probably going to contend for a Super Bowl, you just can't make those mistakes and expect to win the football game. And I know that the defense came out and immediately got a stop, and it kind of made that a wash. But that just kind of set the tone in a way that the Broncos had opportunities and just couldn't convert them. And you saw that the offense actually moved the ball really well in the first half. There were 3 drives of at least 50 yards, 4 of at least, I think, 44 yards 3 of those drives, they had at least 3 first downs. So they moved the ball into Baltimore territory. It's 3rd and 1, and you feel like, man, if we can pick this up, now you're in field goal range. You can potentially take an early lead even after that interception, and the Broncos can't get it on the QB sneak on 3rd and 1, and then Javonte Williams is tackled when kind of on a wide pitch trying to get to the first down marker, and you turn the ball over, and the Ravens don't waste that opportunity. They go and score. And then, the next drive, 4th and 4, I think we can go back and forth on, or at least on Twitter, people have gone back and forth of, do you like taking the deep shot on 4th down, or do you prefer just getting the yards? My mind is he's open, just make the play, right? Because if he catches that, it's a big play. But Bo Nix slightly overshoots Troy Franklin, can't make that play. Ravens go and score again. And so before really much of the game has gone on, you're down 10-0 with 3 big missed opportunities, essentially 3 turnovers. And even if you go like punch for punch with this team and you find a way to just hang around, you're still, I think, going to be like Sean after the game just said, we were trying to be in the game in the 4th quarter. Like, that's what you've got to do with good teams on the road. And unfortunately, turning the ball over 3 times in the first quarter or around the first quarter is just not going to help you get that done. Now, they fought back a little bit, right? Like, Bo makes an insane touchdown catch.
Yeah.
I thought he threw the ball well, made some plays down the field. This Ravens defense, Courtland Sutton said before the game, there's some holes back there in the secondary. I thought they found them. And so they moved the ball well. But again, like the second time they were down there, can't score a touchdown. But Garrett Bowles is called for holding, and Bo Nix's touchdown run gets wiped off the board. And then you're sitting there at 17-10, and that to me, Elisa, was the defining moment of the game. There's 54 seconds left in the first half. The Ravens score in 2 plays, a touchdown. Worst case, you're hoping. I'm sitting up there in the press box. I'm like, man, can they just hold them to a field goal on one of the next 2 possessions so that you're down 10 and you have a chance? And instead, boom, they strike fast. The Broncos take a knee because there's not a lot of time to operate. The Ravens come out of the break, boom, score again. And on that drive, Lamar Jackson, he fumbles the ball. He picks it up. It's tipped in the air. The Broncos almost pick it off, and they can't quite get it. And that was like what kind of day it was in terms of you almost have it, right? If you're Javonte Williams, you almost have the line to game. You almost have this interception. Courtland Sutton at the end of the game, the last Broncos offensive play, he's tackled at the 1-yard line. Like, there's so many plays that you almost have, but you couldn't take advantage. Broncos go 3 and out. The Ravens score again. And so the Broncos have run 4 offensive plays, and the Ravens score 21 points. And it goes from 17-10 to 38-10. And it just shows you, and Courtland Sutton mentioned this after the game, how quickly against a good team things can change. And it teaches you something that if you have an opportunity, you can't waste it, because these really good teams, they will make you pay. And the Ravens made them pay on Sunday.
Yeah, that was something that head coach Sean Payton had talked about when you kind of make those mistakes early on. Like, the really good teams are going to make you pay for those. And that was something that really, in theory you say, but then you got shown that on, in Sunday's game. And when you look at just that sequence that you talked about, Peyton said that was the big swing. He didn't make excuses. He was just like, look, that's, we got beat by a really good team, and they beat us, I believe he said, in all phases of the game. And so he was very adamant about that and just said, like, that was the big swing that really kind of hurt the Broncos in terms of momentum and things like that. But when you look at, I guess, looking at Bo's play for a little bit, he did tend to move the ball well. Obviously, had an interception. He hadn't had one in a couple games, took a couple sacks. So what are the positives you do take away from his performance, although it was kind of a lopsided loss there?
Yeah, I think, and again, like, some of it's just not Bo's fault. You're down 17-10, he kneels it once, and the next time he takes the field, he's down 31-10. Like, that's a tough position for any quarterback. I don't care if it's Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or whoever it might be. Mm-hmm. Like, that's a tough situation for anybody, not just Bo. And so Sean Payton has talked about painting the picture around Bo Nix. I don't know that they did the job they wanted to from a painting perspective. And so, I know we used to talk about how Ben Swanson, I don't know if you knew this, Elisa, he's an artist.
Oh, I
Ben
did not.
likes to draw, he likes to paint.
Okay.
Not the type of painting that Ben Swanson would want to paint. Susie, you have a favorite painting? Sorry, the commenters are not going to like that question.
Yeah.
No, I don't have a favorite painting. Do people have favorite paintings?
Yeah, like
Sure.
Starry Night. Like that's my one.
Sure, that one's great.
Yeah. Let's go with that one.
Works.
She's gonna pick the
That
Mona
felt
Lisa.
like a cop-out, yeah. But Bo in particular, I thought he did a nice job of using his legs in a couple of different ways. He picked up first downs by running, but then he also, I thought, did a really good job of running with the intention of keeping his eyes down the field and throwing. And there were a couple passes. There was a fourth down throw to Courtland Sutton that was inaccurate, a little too high. But then there was one, he steps up, he finds Javonte Williams, and Javonte takes off down the field. I think that was the last play of the first quarter. That was a really big play. And so that impressed me. I thought he continued to battle, late in the game, fourth quarter. There's that play where he's running left, he's dodging people, he's running all the way back to the other side of the field. And it was a 0-yard completion, but I think it just showed the fight that he has and that he's going to keep battling. And so I appreciated that from him. Obviously, a better receiver than maybe we anticipated.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
a lot of it wasn't perfect by any means. And if you look at the box score, it's probably not overly impressive. But I do think there were moments there. And listen, a lot of this season is about how Bo can develop. And I said this on the instant reaction, but I think when you look at Bo, he's just a very different player than he was week 1 or week 2. He looks so much more comfortable, so much more confident, and that's a good sign for the Broncos.
Yeah, and I think as you look at this road trip, right, this team was well aware that this is going to be probably the toughest 2 games of the season, given that both of these teams were in the AFC Championship game. Obviously, the Chiefs won the Super Bowl last year. So you kind of have to turn the page, but
We don't talk about that, Elisa.
but I'm saying, you have to take that on. And I think when, the guys are well aware, look, we know the matchups that these are. We know that, these are going to be really tough games. And so you have to take the positives, even from the losses. And I think one of the biggest positives that came out from Sunday's game was the play of Courtland Sutton and the way that he was really able, like you said, to find those holes and those kind of weaknesses in the secondary to give his quarterback an opportunity to really kind of find him. He had this back-to-back 100-yard games for him, receiving yard games, the first time since 2020 for the Broncos. So I think, for him to kind of find a stride there, I think that's going to be helpful to kind of continue to build on that, especially when you're going against another tough opponent.
Yeah, he's going to have to play well against Kansas City. Typically has had those moments where he's played well against the Chiefs. But yeah, you need your number 1 receiver to play like a number 1 receiver, and he's done that the last couple of weeks. But there's also this element, and Sean Payton mentioned it after the game, and we'll get to it in terms of the importance of the season, but the turnover margin, you're going to have to win it in these types of games. The margin for error just isn't as high, and you can almost count the turnover on downs in that turnover category, even though it's not quite considered the same thing. But yeah, Bo can play well and Courtland can play well, but you need a little bit more, and you can't have the mistakes, right, to go with that too. You might survive them against some lesser teams, but when you play these really good football teams, you've got to be at your absolute best. And so hopefully the Broncos are up to that challenge this week. But Courtland was one of the guys who talked about how this sort of loss can in some ways be good and necessary for a young team. And I do want to talk about that in a second, but I feel like the defense also is something that we should probably touch on here.
Yeah. So looking at the defense, I did write down this stat because John Franklin Myers recorded 1 sack in the game, improving his season total to 4 sacks. This is the 3rd most he's had recorded in one season. You do have, again, these kind of spots. They were able to put pressure on Lamar Jackson and get to him a few times. But it wasn't a performance that they obviously were proud of. Again, one thing about this team is that there is accountability there, and they're willing to say, yeah, obviously hindsight's 2020, but there's certain things that they felt they could get back. And I believe going into this matchup, Cooper had mentioned that it's really hard to tackle Derrick Henry. And I think he was he scored 2 touchdowns that game. He's one of the first NFL players to ever just have a touchdown in each single game with a new team. And his dominance is really well known across the league. Now, they were kind of able to slim down a little bit, but what are the takeaways that you saw from the defensive performance from Sunday?
Yeah, I think the big thing is just they knew it wasn't good enough, and you could tell like Jonathan Cooper was just furious in the locker room afterwards. And he wasn't like freaking out or anything, but you could just tell he was mad about the performance.
Right.
And DJ Jones was like, this wasn't good enough. And Nick Bonito was talking about it's not good enough. And I think that was the reaction, is that the guys were just, it was more like anger at themselves almost, that
they know they're capable of performing better given what they put out the last couple of weeks.
Right. And I think they, in some ways, Sean Payton mentioned it Monday that when they studied Lamar Jackson, when he doesn't practice Wednesday or Thursday, they tend to do fewer designed runs with the quarterback. They keep him in the pocket. And I actually thought in the first half they did a good job of slowing Derrick Henry down. I think the Ravens only had 24 rushing yards in the first half, but they still scored 24 points because Lamar was just surgical in the pocket. And he had a perfect passer rating in the first half, which he continued in the second half. He had 2 touchdowns in the first half. And he just stood in there and made some good throws. Now, not having PJ Locke out there, I'm sure hurts a little bit.
Yeah.
There are plays where, because of Lamar's ability to, one of the touchdowns, I think it was the Ravens' second score, it feels like you've got a chance to get a red zone stop, and then he just moves around long enough that it's hard for the corner to keep up for that long. And then, boom, they've got a touchdown. And so, it is probably the toughest test they're going to face all year. So I wouldn't, overreact if I were a fan about this defensive performance. I still think against a lot of teams, they're going to find a way to play well defensively. And the run game became more of an issue in the second half when there was this big lead and you maybe had to take a few more chances and you start to get tired from being out there so much. But it was a little bit out of character because people build it up all week as here's the best offense versus one of the best defenses. Mm-hmm. And the defense even kind of showed that on the first series, but then they were unable to keep it up. Too many big plays, as Jonathan Cooper said. You give them a big play, then they get a first down in the red zone, and that's when they're at their best because of Lamar's ability to be a dual threat. And so those were some of the challenges. I saw Zach Allen talked about being double teamed for really the first time. Yeah. And so he's got to figure out how to deal with that and how to find a way to still make plays. Mm-hmm. But again, defensively, there were some times where you had a chance to get off the field on third down. I mentioned that play earlier where Lamar drops the ball, almost gets picked. It gets to a 3rd and 10, and you get good pressure on him, and then he escapes and runs for a first down, and it's deflating in a way of, we're doing everything we can out here, and it's still hard to stop this guy. Yeah. But I talked with a couple of media people after the game. I don't know that a whole lot of teams were stopping Lamar the way he played on Sunday, and obviously he's always really impressive. I don't know if he's always that impressive because a perfect passer rating, the way he played was just insane. And I don't know that a lot of teams are going to be able to slow him down if he plays like that. Yeah,
his reputation really precedes him. The way that he's been able to really move the ball, scramble out the pocket, all the things that the Broncos knew he was capable of doing, he just did it at such a high level on Sunday that it's almost like, how do you defend it when he is playing as close to perfect as he possibly can in that matchup? And so even you look at some of the guys like Zay Flowers, his longest catch was 53 yards. That was off the touchdown. He had two touchdowns on the day. Derrick Henry also had 2 touchdowns on the day. So you kind of see how he's able to kind of really mix the ball up between Derrick Henry, his receivers, and also himself, like you said, scrambling to kind of get the first down or kind of making guys miss and things like that. Suze, I thought you had something to say right now.
Oh, do I? I can add.
I saw a twitch.
Yeah.
Go,
no,
Suze.
I feel like this was a tall order, they're back at home after a tough loss last week. They were going to come out ready to play. Obviously, they came out ready to play in the first half. I think, especially defensively, I think a lot of the guys were upset after the game because they knew that swing in the middle right before the half and right after the half is kind of what defined the game. So I think it was a tall order to face them coming off of a tough loss like that, but that's going to happen week in and week out. So, it's not an excuse by any means, but I feel like Lamar was at the top of his game, and that's kind of just the way it goes.
Well, those late touchdowns, right? That was the concern at first. It's giving up those early touchdowns and those late touchdowns, and then they're kind of able to sustain that a little bit. But then those 2 touchdowns at the end of the first half, and then the touchdown then beginning of the second half. To your point, that's really what caused the game to kind of lose control. And I think Sean Payton had mentioned that it made them kind of play one-dimensional, which is not what you want to do against a good team.
Yeah, it was just too quick. And listen, it's a tough ask. Like Sue said, you have a challenge of they get the ball back with 54 seconds, 56 seconds, whatever it was. And I think they had a good return on that as well. So you now need to stop them from basically getting 20, 25, 30 yards in 50 seconds. And they're so explosive that I think you're worried about giving up something too deep, but then you also don't want to give up too big of an intermediate completion either. Yeah. So there's a defensive holding call because you're trying not to get beat. And then, you know, the touchdown right before the half, it's not I mean, it was a deep enough pass, 20, 25 yards, but it's that you've got guys deeper trying not to give up the huge play, and then Flowers finds an angle, ends up getting away after one missed tackle. And it, against some of these teams, it's like that where one guy's going to have to make the stop, or you need great individual efforts, or else it's going to be a tough ask. And, just like make no mistake, the Chiefs are going to be a real challenge on offense too. But I think the way the Ravens are playing is just a little bit different than how the Chiefs want to play, and the Chiefs have struggled a bit more offensively. So I don't want to say it's an easier challenge by any means, because it's just different.
Right.
But I do think there are ways that Lamar and that offense challenge you in a way that nobody else in the league does, outside of maybe like a Detroit. I'm not saying they're the same stylistically, but just from a like quick strike ability. And so I said this right after the game. There's a difference between like being upset with a loss and wanting to win, and also realizing that, like Sean Payton said Monday, the Broncos are still building this thing, and the Ravens are a team that has built what they have and have a 2-time MVP and have been in the AFC Championship game, and their quest is to like get over the hump from AFC Championship to win a Super Bowl. Yeah. Whereas the Broncos are trying to rebuild this thing and get back to the postseason. So it's two organizations in a little bit of a different spot, and I just think there needs to be this. I don't want to, like, you don't have to accept it necessarily if you're a fan, but it is good to just understand that they're in different places, and you can still have a successful year and make the playoffs and challenge for the postseason, while also recognizing that where you are in your process is going to be really hard to knock off one of these teams.
Yeah,
and
the top team
doesn't mean you can't do it on like any given Sunday. You know, whatever can happen, but it's certainly a tough test for any defense. And so I think I've tried to keep perspective, and I was talking to Suze after the game. She was trying to make me keep the perspective of you can be upset with the loss, but also realize that, like, again, and we say it almost every week, coming into the season, external expectations were not high. Broncos were not picked to win more than 5.5 games. Right. This was all about what is Bo going to be. And so it's great to enjoy the success now, but then the natural thing is you always want more, and you just got to remember it's a process. And so that's why there are losses you come in and I just feel awful for like 24, 48 hours in a row. Mm-hmm. This was a tough loss, no doubt about it, but I don't have like the same doom and gloom, because I think I just recognize that Broncos are working to get to that, and there's no reason that if they make the playoffs that they can't go in and play great for a day. Maybe you have a better plan for Lamar and you pull an upset, but I do think it is worth noting that right now, like, it would be an upset. You're building to get to where that team is, and so I don't think there's a need to be miserable or hang your head. Like, this is a process that's going to take time.
Yeah, one thing that Sean Payton had said at the beginning of the year is, like, when you lose games, it's easy to overlook the good things, and when you win games, it's easy to overlook the bad things. And so when you have a win like this, it's like you kind of take and build what you can from it. And I think one of the interesting things I felt about this game post game wise was after the Chargers game, for example, it was like, we just want to get out of our system, let's flush it, let's move on from this. This loss seems to be like, no, let's really learn from this, and let's really get stuff that we can really build upon and learn, whether it's, schemes or just the way that they're approaching the game, et cetera. This loss just seems like they internalize it more in a positive way to potentially use whatever from this game to attack the other team that's also top in the AFC.
Suze, did I do a good job of summing up your message to me?
Yes, I think so. I mean, you mentioned that earlier in the year you told all the podcast listeners to relax. So I said, maybe you might have to do the same thing.
Which I think we're in a very mellow, relaxing tone for all of Broncos country to just kind of, woosah a little bit. Obviously, this would have been a huge win, but I also think that it's also a good lesson to kind of just have. And like you said, that adds to this is part of the growing pains of having a young team and having a rookie quarterback and having, just guys that are trying to gel together and deal with certain pieces being missing and things like that. So teeing off into that, more into the players' mindsets, I think we kind of saw, especially Jaleel McLaughlin, talking to those guys, understanding how the run game is really going to play a big part going forward. Sean Payton mentioned the defense. He was not a reference to yesterday, but the way the defense has been playing all season, we're going to need both of these things to work in order for the Broncos to have success. Now, talking to Jaleel McLaughlin earlier today, you kind of get the sense that he and the other backs are really ready to take on that challenge to continue to push forward. And I feel that plays into the mindset and the mentality of this team, that grittiness that we've been crediting all season long.
Yeah, there were kind of 3 or 4 key things that Sean Payton mentioned when he was asked, what do you need to do over the second half of the season to go from 5-4 to where you want to get to, which, as several players have said, is the postseason, right? And to get back to the playoffs for the first time since 2015. He mentioned running the football, which is important. The Broncos are kind of league average right now in running the football. I believe 16th in the league, 15th in the league, somewhere right in there. They in their wins, and this is kind of, you see stats sometimes that are if the Broncos run the ball 30 times, they're 4-0. And if they run the ball fewer than 30 times, they're 0-5. Well, yeah, because a lot of the time, against the Panthers or the Saints or the Raiders, if you're up late, you're running the ball a lot to
run out the
clock. And so your rushing totals get inflated. And so, boom, all of a sudden you've run it over 30 times. Could the Broncos have not run it at all against the Saints in the second half and still won the game? Sure, they could have. So that's not a predictive stat in my mind, because the other thing is, if you're losing, like yesterday against the Ravens, if you just come out and run it every play in the second half, the Ravens would have been that's good by us.
Right.
Take your 3 or 4 yards at a time, maybe get a 10-yard chunk, but you're just going to waste all the time in the world. And so that stat I don't love, and I saw someone tweet it last week of the Broncos should be running it 30 times a game because they're 4-0 when they do that. Well, yeah, there's a reason for that. It's not otherwise teams would just start by running 30 times in a row, and then once you hit that 30 mark, boom, you're good. So I just felt like that was a little ridiculous that I saw. Anyway.
That's fair.
But they do need to run the ball. They do need to keep balance, and that's more important. Can you pick up a first down on 2nd and 4 with a run, which we saw the Broncos do a couple times yesterday? Can you keep yourself out of 3rd and longs? That's important. Sean Payton did say maybe you see a little more of Audric Estime, Javonte Williams, and Jaleel McLaughlin got most of the work yesterday in the last couple of weeks, but perhaps there's a chance for the rookie to get involved. He mentioned stopping the run as one of the key things. The Broncos are still 5th in run yards per attempt, I believe 9th in rushing defense per game. So their numbers weren't really impacted yesterday, even though the Ravens ran for a decent number of yards. But the reason it wasn't terrible was that they only ran for 24 in the first half, but then they ran for more than 100 in the second when they kind of decided to lean on the ground game. So, again, we've seen a couple times this year where the rush defense has not been great. Seattle, L.A. yesterday in the second half. And when you look at those things, you see a common denominator of the Broncos have not won those football games. And so you've got to find ways to put quarterbacks in longer downs and distances. You can't give them easy first downs. You can't stay on the field for these long drives, which teams get going on when they can run the football well. And so that to me is a mindset, a physicality deal. And again, some teams it's easier against than others to stop the run, and some teams it's going to take a Herculean effort. But the Broncos have to find a way to do that. So that was another one of the key things Sean mentioned. And then the turnover margin is just critical. You see, really, he mentioned the elite teams, right?
Yeah.
The elite teams can overcome a turnover and can overcome losing the turnover battle. The Broncos right now, and based on what Sean said, where they are in this process, they don't have that margin for error necessarily. And I think they're 5-1, I believe, when they record a turnover. They are 0-3. There we go. Making sure the math works.
Suze, is the mathin'?
Sure.
You gotta say, I believe so.
I think so. Yeah. 5-1 when the defense records a takeaway, 0-3 when they don't. So that shows you that, one, they need this defense to make plays. And then second, you have to win the turnover battle. It can't just be that the defense takes the ball away, because I believe the Broncos are 5-0 when they either win or tie the turnover battle, and they're 0-4 when they lose it. So that kind of speaks to, again, the importance of taking care of the football, and those are some of the key things that they need to do. And it's not like a difficult scenario. Like, it's not revolutionary to be like, we need to be good stopping the run, we need to be good running the ball,
right,
and we need to be good against the turnover, or, in the turnover margin. But you got to do it. And we've seen the Broncos do it against, like, they don't win the game against New York probably if they're not tied in the turnover margin and have that big rushing performance in the second half. I don't know if they come back against the Raiders, obviously, if they don't have that, the Pat Surtain pick six or some of the other takeaways they got. Certainly it made wins over the Saints and Panthers. The Panthers, they tied the turnover battle, but it made them larger wins. And if you'd been able to get a turnover against Pittsburgh or the Chargers, maybe you find a way to win that football game. So that's got to be a focus as this team moves forward, just finding a way. And again, it's kind of a silly stat, because obviously the Broncos, like yesterday, Bo threw an interception, but it didn't cost them any points.
Okay.
But the Broncos are now 0-4 when Bo throws an interception. So it speaks to just the importance of taking care of the ball. It didn't hurt them yesterday necessarily, but
if you see that stat, you're like, he just needs to not turn the ball over and we'll win games.
And he's been pretty good at that. But I think it just underlines the importance of taking care of the football and taking it away.
Yeah. Just looking at these numbers, it's interesting to kind of see the way that the Broncos really came out against this game. And like you said, like it's all about, like, that's not the best feeling when you almost had it, right? Or you almost were 1-2 plays away from potentially changing this game. And then, you go into another matchup, against the Kansas City Chiefs, again, on the road, ideally one of the tougher places to play. It's really loud there as well. And so I think you kind of lean back to what you've kind of done over the course of the season. We're about halfway through the season, which is crazy to think how quickly this is going. But you do have to kind of, not to be cheesy, but like reflect a little bit in the law. Like what from those losses can you take away, and what can you kind of build towards that, right? Whether it's, Bo Nix's grittiness and his willing to not quit and try to make big plays for his team in order for them to get a chance to score. Or it's, the running game really getting going. Javonte Williams against the Saints, like, he was able to really kind of have, I think, had 2 touchdowns in that game and kind of really kind of get things going there. Jaleel McLaughlin, again, spoke about that today. Like, these young guys are ready and they're willing to kind of, a lot of the offenses run through running backs. I mean, look at the Baltimore Ravens alone, like the way they're able to utilize Derrick Henry. And, I think they acknowledge, like, Williams, McLaughlin, and estimate, like, okay, we have to kind of find a way to really balance our offense out so that we can be effective by finding these holes, on the defensive side, to give a big run, to take the pressure off of our quarterback, to not have to play out third and long a lot, or have the opportunity to make a big play that kind of keeps these drives alive. Because stalling out on drives is not a recipe for success, especially when you're going against these big top teams.
Yeah, you've got to be at your best, and you've got to control the clock and make the timely plays in the passing game. And I think the Broncos have done a great job of getting to where they are. Like, I think there's, no matter if you think they should make the playoffs this year, or you think it's going to take some more time, I don't think anyone can kind of downplay what they've been able to accomplish so far in winning 5 out of their first 9 games. Like, nobody expected that. Nobody was picking that externally.
Right.
It was just people inside the building that believed in their ability to do that. But I feel like if you're the Broncos, you're also thinking, man, there's a lot of opportunities, and we talked about it in regards to the Ravens game, but there's several other games too where you can look at and be like, man, in Seattle we had a couple of red zone possessions where if we take care of those, maybe we win that football game.
Yeah.
Or against Pittsburgh, you have a big play to Josh Reynolds, have a chance to cut the lead to 1 score, and Bo Nix is intercepted in the back of the end zone. There's the Chargers game. Like, you almost come back, and maybe if you don't give up quite that many rushing yards in the first half, like, maybe you're able to find a way to win that game. And so, and that's part of the NFL. You're never going to be perfect. You're going to have your ups and downs. But I think if you're the Broncos, it's not like this game against the Ravens was maybe one of the first ones, and they still had their opportunities, but it just got out of hand.
Yeah.
It was one of the first games that they just have been kind of, well, it's their first loss that's not by one score, first of all. So, like, it shows you that they've been close in these other ones. But I feel like it's almost encouraging that if it's not like in a lot of these games you're getting blown out and you have no chance. And there's some teams around the league, and yesterday notwithstanding, there's some teams around the league that week after week they're in these uncompetitive games. And Broncos have been in a lot of close games. And so you've got to just think, hey, if we can find a way to take advantage of an opportunity here, an opportunity there. They did it against the Raiders, right, where you're down 10-0. Surtain has a chance. If he drops that or he gets tackled at the 10-yard line, maybe we're talking about a different record or a different game.
Right.
But he took advantage of that chance. And, Bo, some of the plays he's made with his legs, some of the passes he's thrown, he's taken advantage of those chances. And you just want to see guys continue to do that. I thought what Courtland Sutton said in the locker room after the game was important, that he said this game was like the stove is hot, don't touch it moment in terms of like you learn a lesson quickly and you got to learn it from experience. And that in a game like the one in Baltimore, you just have to take advantage of your chances against a really good team, or else you can blank and it's, 31-10 instead of 17-10 if you don't take advantage of your chance to score in the red zone or take advantage of that attempt to Troy Franklin. And so that's part of this process that you're talking about, right, is that there are these growing pains, but I think the nice thing is that these growing pains, these ups and downs are happening with the Broncos being relevant and in the playoff conversation instead of if you were 2-7 and having these conversations, like the growing pains they're just not quite as enjoyable, and they're not
just
quite
pain.
as they're not
It's just pain.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put it. Like, instead of just pain, these are growing pains because you're working towards something and you've had some success. And Broncos are just gonna have to keep fighting through that as they move forward.
Yeah, I also like the aggressiveness. Not only that the Broncos showed on fourth down and kind of those things, but they knew that they had to be aggressive and physical against the Ravens. And one of my favorite, highlights, or things everyone's highlight, was that connection between Sutton and Nix, like that kind of like their own, I guess, like Philly special that they were able to kind of do. And Sutton, for the one passing touchdown game, became just the third Broncos wide receiver to pass for a score in team history, the first since blank player in 2018. Do you know who that player is?
Yes, I know who that player is.
Suze, do you know who that player is?
Was not here in 2018.
You don't have to be here.
Emmanuel Sanders in 2018 was the last wide receiver to throw for a touchdown for the Broncos. But kind of seeing that, I mean, I know like in hindsight, like we're looking at the score and things like that doesn't look as important. But I think it is because, one, it shows you the connection that they're able to kind of build. Also, it shows you kind of like that the Broncos do have these tricks up their sleeve to kind of, switch up their offense a little bit to catch teams off guard, especially when you're playing a good team like the Ravens. You have to kind of find a way to kind of get them off balance. And I thought that was a good way to kind of show that.
Yeah, I agree. I also think it partially it kind of shows you like where the team is in terms of you might need because they had first and goal at the 1 and they couldn't score on 3 straight plays. And you'd like to be able to just line up against a team and just overpower them and run into the end zone. And I think that, and granted, maybe you're able to do that the next time you play them, but
that ties into what Payton had said about really focusing on the run game, so that is kind of like the key to their success down the line, is stopping the run on the other side and then using their backs to capitalize on those moments when you are so close, to the goal line.
Yeah, but it also, like a trick play going for it on fourth down. Sean Payton said Sunday, it's a little more palatable to go for it on fourth down when you're playing a team like the Ravens that is going to score a bunch. But I also think it speaks to the Broncos knowing, like, we've got to keep up with these guys, and that maybe down the road when you've built, like, if you saw that your defense was going out there and playing incredibly, maybe you don't feel the need to go for it on as many fourth downs because they're able to hold Lamar in check. And so I do think it was just, like he said, it was kind of all 3 phases that weren't quite where they needed to be.
Yeah.
It was everybody. He said we didn't do anything well enough to win. And so, listen, I don't want to take anything away from the play that Bo made because it was in Courtland too. It was a good throw, falling away. But I also think like first and goal from the 1, you'd like to think you can get in on one of those first 3 chances because you're not going to be able to consistently rely on that type of trick play,
right?
I think so. But it was a great play, great highlight, and Bo's now the first player in the NFL this year to throw, catch, and run for a touchdown. So a nice little spot for him in the record book.
It's the little things.
Yeah.
It's the
fun.
Little things.
And now you get ready for a game against Kansas City, and I thought, Zach...
Dun. That deserves sound effects.
Yeah, it's like going into the Death Star or something,
Yeah.
Trying to overthrow those guys. Obviously, haven't won there since 2015, and we'll talk a lot more about it on Thursday. But it was just Zach Allen was talking about guys on the plane home, like their focus was good, they were locked in, and you mentioned it. The Chargers game, there was sort of like we want to play right away, but let's not think about this one again. And I think guys are going to use this one to fuel them. Certainly, who knows how Sunday's game turns out. It's not like you're playing, as Sean Payton says, he doesn't name a college, but it's not like it's not an SEC school playing a school from, that's 1,000 kids and you're paying them $1 million to come play you. Like that doesn't happen in the NFL.
Right.
So regardless, it would be tough, but now you're going to play the only undefeated team in the league. So it's going to be a huge challenge. But all that said, Vance Joseph's defense it did well against Mahomes last year. Mm-hmm. And these guys are going to be fired up, I'm sure, to prove that last week was just kind of an aberration and that this is not the type of defense that they are because NFL guys, they're proud. Yeah. They are, they don't want anybody thinking, like we can just run all over this defense or we can do what we want. So I'm excited.
Or they're not who they say they are.
Exactly. Yeah.
And well, what are you most excited about this team to kind of do going into week 10?
Yeah, I think it's just got to be look at the tape and see how many chances you had against Baltimore and then just work as hard as you possibly can this week to find those opportunities against the Chiefs and then convert on them, right? Mm-hmm. And division games, you always expect them to be close. The Chiefs are going to be mad. They're going to want to beat the Broncos because Broncos snapped that streak last year. But Denver just has to find a way to play their game. They've got to play a smart game. You can't make mistakes. Yeah. You might have to convert a few fourth downs against the Chiefs to keep up with them there. But listen, this team is, again, they're still building, but I think they've shown an ability that they can go and compete with the better teams in the league at times. Last year they went and knocked off Buffalo, and that was a Buffalo team that was struggling a bit at the time but had a lot of talent and beat the Chiefs at home. And so under Sean Payton, they've shown the ability to do that. They've just got to have a good game plan, get ready to go. Chiefs play tonight, so a little bit of a short week for the Chiefs to get ready, so maybe that helps the Broncos a little bit, that extra day of rest.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're going to need their best again. And it's two very different, like the Ravens were this explosive offense with a defense that maybe had some question marks.
Yeah.
The Chiefs are the exact opposite. This defense is really good. Steve Spagnuolo does a great job. He brings pressure. Bo Nix is going to have to be ready for that. And this offense probably has more questions than it has, but he added DeAndre Hopkins. Mm-hmm. Travis Kelce's getting going a little bit. Yeah. So there's still going to be a tough test, and obviously it would be the marquee win of the season for the Broncos so far if they can drop the Chiefs from the ranks of the unbeaten, but it's going to be tough.
Yeah, well, that's one of the interesting things about the NFL, right? And we always joke and say any given Sunday, things like that, because the message going into this Week 9 game was the defensive players really saying, like, look, like, this is our chance to show how we stack up against the best. This is our chance to make a statement. This is our chance to do. You have that exact same chance again, back-to-back weeks, right? And not, and sometimes I feel like when you have those kind of losses or you have performance that you're not proud of, you don't get an instant redemption, right? And I think for this team, all the goals that they had going into Week 9 of like, we're going to see how we stack up. We need to show that we are the defense that we say we are, that we're on paper. We're just as good in person as we are on paper. All those like mindsets that they have the exact same opportunity to do it again now against the Chiefs, because the Ravens and the Chiefs are put in that same conversation of, potentially going to Super Bowl, potentially an AFC Championship rematch, et cetera, et cetera. So if you can't do it this week, you now have a chance the following week with potentially, I don't know how big of an impact that gives them, but one less day of rest for them since they're playing on Monday Night Football. But you have that short week for them. And so it's like, what are you going to do to now take on that challenge to still make a statement, still show that, week 9 was quote unquote a fluke, and that you guys are able to really put pressure and, have these guys like Zach Allen and Jonathan Cooper and Nick Bonito and, JFM and all these guys really kind of get going against Patrick Mahomes because he's just as elusive as Lamar Jackson. And you kind of get a focus of, okay, so the mindset for this team and what they're looking to build on, they can take that from the Ravens game and adapt it to Kansas City. And I feel like that's what this team really kind of rallied around, despite the loss being the loss that it was.
Yeah, and it's not a must-win game. Like, part of the nice thing about the Broncos being 5-3 is that you give yourself some wiggle room. It certainly helped yesterday that the Colts lost, helped that the Dolphins lost. There were a couple the Jets did win, but they've obviously still got a lot
Why'd you make that face?
Well, because I'm talking about teams that might challenge the Broncos. Like right now, it's the Bengals and the Colts that are kind of like they're going to scare you a little bit, but you're still right in that mix, still the 7 seed in the AFC, and so it's not a must win necessarily. But if you can win it, and we talk, about one, can you get to 10 wins? And so for the Broncos, that now means can you go 5-3 the rest of the way? And obviously, if you win this one, then you just have to go 4-3 compared to 5-2, which is significantly different. I mean, it sounds like, of course, but it's significantly different.
Yeah.
But I also think we talk about games that you quote unquote should win, and there's some home games coming up that are going to fall into that bucket, I think. But then there's also, if you look at some of these road games, you might have to steal one or two, and that's games like this one or at LA or at Cincinnati. And so you've got to find a way to get one or two of those probably. And so if you can get it this week, and again, it's not like the season is over if you don't. It would put a lot of pressure coming back home against Atlanta. But so it's not a must win, but if you can win it, it significantly increases your playoff odds and would go a long way and kind of be one of those quote unquote stolen games that you need to get. So another big opportunity, I think, despite the loss of the Ravens, people would be right back to talking about the Broncos as, hey, they're at least a team that can be dangerous in the postseason. And the
dark horse. You never know.
That's kind of nice. Horse, yeah. That's good.
Well, I think also when you kind of look at this upcoming matchup and kind of what the stipulations are, this has been a tough month in general because not only do you have 2 tough road opponents, but you're on the road 3 out of the 4 weeks of November. You only have 1 home game in November before you kind of come back home. So
where else do we go?
Well, I'm saying, we go to Sue's look up the schedule, but I'm pretty sure we get Baltimore, then we go to Kansas City, then home against Atlanta, and I think we travel
to Vegas.
For the Raiders game. Another. So we have 2 divisional games in this month. You're traveling 3 out of the 4 weeks. So that's a tough kind of...
Miss my dog. I'm just gone all the time. My poor dog.
It's a tough schedule. It reminds me of the first month of the season, the way that Bo really had to start his 2 starts on the road, 1 home game, and then back on the road again. So I think, again, the growing pains that we talked about are coming from September to now. Like, what did you learn from that month, and how do you adapt that to this month as you go against even tougher competitors and then 2 divisional rivals in that?
Yeah, maybe I change where I put my dog while I'm gone. So I'm going to cost a little bit less.
What are you doing?
Focusing on the details. That's what I'm doing.
That's what she's doing. I'm sure we're gonna have a bunch of commenters like, Aric, I will watch your dog. Would you let a YouTube commenter watch your dog?
I would not.
All right, before we get out of here, want to get some final thoughts.
Unless they were like a nice YouTube commenter, then maybe.
You have a lot of nice YouTube commenters.
Yeah, but
he didn't deny that.
They don't.
Yeah.
They don't all live here though. So how do you know if?
I'm sure they would fly in just to watch your dog. I'm saying, it's the whiz. I'm just saying.
The NFL whiz.
Exactly. Well, getting some final thoughts here before we get out of here on Altitude Advantage. Suze, what are your final thoughts as we close the book on week 9?
Yeah, what I was trying to say before we got distracted about the dog talk was I just think down the stretch here, it's going to be very important to focus on the details. A lot of the players have talked about that and how, when you have a team that's building like the Broncos are right now, that can be the difference, is focusing on those details and finding a way to get the job done in some of those games that maybe are not ones that you necessarily should have but still have the opportunity to capitalize on. So I think that'll be the difference maker for sure.
What about you? What are your final?
I'm not going to say anything smarter than that.
I will watch your dog.
Mic drop from our digital media contributor, Susanna Ware. So, again, we appreciate you guys listening to another episode of Altitude Advantage. Again, I'm your host and team reporter, Elisa Hernandez. Across the table from me, The Wiz. Needs a dog babysitter. Aric DiLalla. And we have our digital media contributor next to me, Susanna Ware. So we appreciate you guys listening. Again, leave your comments, questions, hit like, subscribe, share this podcast with all your friends, because we're going to be back with another episode on Thursday.